You really thought you could park betrayal in my driveway?
The notification sound from my wife's phone cut through the morning silence like a knife. Sarah grabbed it before I could even glance over, clutching it against her chest like some precious secret. That's when I knew our marriage was officially screwed. "Privacy rules, Pete," she said, not meeting my eyes as she headed for the bathroom. "Everyone deserves privacy." Privacy rules. Right. Because nothing says healthy marriage like treating your phone like classified government documents. I'm Pete Grayson, 37 years old, and I fix people's computer problems for a living, which means I know exactly how much digital evidence people leave behind when they think they're being clever. My wife, Sarah, apparently never got that memo. The signs had been building for weeks. Late-night work calls that required her to step outside. Girls' nights that somehow always ended with her coming home smelling like expensive cologne I definitely couldn't afford. And then there was the way she'd started dressing for her job at the marketing firm, like she was auditioning for a role in a cologne commercial instead of managing social media accounts. But it was the phone thing that really sealed it. Sarah used to leave her phone lying around like everyone else. Now she carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I asked to use it to check the weather last Tuesday, she acted like I'd requested access to Fort Knox. "Use your own phone," she'd snapped, which would have been reasonable if mine hadn't been charging upstairs. That's when I decided to do what any self-respecting IT consultant would do. I started paying attention to the details. Sarah worked at Pinnacle Marketing, a mid-sized firm downtown where she managed their social media presence. Her boss was a guy named David Chen, mid-40s, divorced, drove a black BMW that he parked in the spot right next to Sarah's Honda Civic every morning. I knew this because Sarah had mentioned it multiple times, along with how understanding David was about flexible schedules and how he really got her creative vision. The first concrete evidence came on a Thursday evening. Sarah was in the shower, and her iPad was sitting on the kitchen counter, logged into her personal accounts. A notification popped up from her group chat with her friends, Lisa and Michelle. Lisa: "Girl, you're glowing lately. New skincare routine." Sarah: "Something like that. Let's just say work has been very rewarding." Michelle: "David treating you right?" Sarah: "He knows exactly how to handle me." I screenshotted that conversation faster than you could say marital evidence. Then I did what any reasonable person would do. I started digging deeper. Sarah's Venmo account showed payments to places I'd never heard of: expensive restaurants downtown, a hotel bar, a wine shop that specialized in bottles that cost more than our monthly grocery budget, all during her supposed late meetings and client dinners. Her Instagram activity was even more telling. She'd been liking David's photos going back months: beach vacation shots from last summer, gym selfies, pictures of his BMW, and he'd been returning the favor, hearting every single one of her posts with the kind of consistency that suggested he was getting notifications every time she breathed. But the smoking tool came from an unexpected source: our neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. Mrs. Rodriguez was 73 years old and had the kind of eagle-eyed surveillance skills that would make the CIA jealous. She knew everyone's business on our block, mostly because she spent her days stationed at her front window like a suburban watchtower. "Pete, honey," she said, cornering me while I was getting the mail, "I don't mean to pry, but is everything okay with you and Sarah?" "Why do you ask?" "Well, it's just that I've seen that fancy BMW in your driveway a few times when you're at work. And yesterday, I saw Sarah getting out of it around lunchtime, and she looked, well, her hair was a bit mussed." Mrs. Rodriguez delivered this information with the kind of delicate tact that comes from decades of neighborhood diplomacy. But the message was crystal clear. My wife was bringing her boss home for afternoon activities that definitely weren't work-related. That evening, I decided to test a theory. I suggested we have dinner at Romano's, the Italian place downtown that showed up on Sarah's Venmo history. "Oh, I'm not really in the mood for Italian," she said quickly. "Besides, that place is overpriced." Interesting, considering she'd apparently spent $87 there last Tuesday during her client lunch. "How do you know it's overpriced?" I asked. "Have you been there recently?" The pause was microscopic, but I caught it. "Lisa mentioned it. She said it wasn't worth the money." Lisa, who lived on a teacher's salary and considered Olive Garden a splurge, sure. I decided it was time to bring in reinforcements. My best friend Jake worked as a bartender at Murphy's, the kind of place where people went to drink away their problems and occasionally share more information than they should. Jake had been my wingman since college and had the kind of loyalty that money couldn't buy. "I need a favor," I told him over beers the next Friday. Sarah's been acting weird, and I think she might be cheating. Jake's expression darkened. He'd never been Sarah's biggest fan, something about her fake smile and the way she talked down to service workers. What do you need? Information. Her boss is a guy named David Chen, drives a black BMW, probably mid-40s. If he shows up here with anyone who looks like my wife, I want to know about it. Jake nodded grimly. You got it, brother. The call came 3 days later. Pete, you need to get down here. Now. I found them in a corner booth, sharing a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's car payments. Sarah was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, and David had his hand on her thigh like he owned it. They were leaning into each other, laughing at some private joke, completely oblivious to the world around them. I watched from the bar for 20 minutes, taking pictures with my phone and feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just an affair, it was a full-blown relationship. They had inside jokes, comfortable silences, the kind of easy intimacy that takes time to develop. When Sarah got up to use the bathroom, David pulled out his phone and started texting. 30 seconds later, Sarah's phone buzzed from inside her purse. Even from across the room, I could see her smile when she read whatever he'd sent. That's when I realized this wasn't just about love or a midlife crisis. Sarah had checked out of our marriage completely and moved in with someone else, even if she was still sleeping in my bed. The next morning, I made coffee for 2 and waited for Sarah to come downstairs. When she appeared, still in her robe, I slid a manila folder across the kitchen table. What's this? She asked, though something in her voice suggested she already knew. Your performance review, I said calmly. Turns out your work at Pinnacle Marketing has been very hands-on. Sarah opened the folder and went white. Inside were printouts of her Venmo transactions, screenshots of her Instagram activity, photos from Murphy's, and a detailed timeline of her activities over the past month. Everything was organized with the kind of methodical precision that comes from years of troubleshooting complex problems. Pete, I can explain. Actually, you can't, I interrupted, because there's no explanation that makes this okay. You've been lying to me for months, bringing your boyfriend to our house and spending our money on your little romance. The only question now is whether you want to end this with some dignity or if you prefer the alternative. What alternative? I pulled out my phone and showed her a contact screen. David's wife, Jennifer. Turns out she's on Facebook, and she seems like a very nice woman. I'm sure she'd be interested to know how her divorce settlement is being spent. Sarah's face went from white to green. He told me they were separated. They are, as of last month. Funny thing about divorce proceedings, adultery can really complicate the financial arrangements, especially when there's photographic evidence. For the first time in months, Sarah looked at me like she was actually seeing me. What do you want? I want you to pack your things and move out, today. You can stay with Lisa or Michelle or whoever else has been cheering you on. I want you to transfer your half of the savings account to your own name. Consider it a head start on your new life. And I want you to tell David that if he ever sets foot on my property again, his wife gets a very detailed photo album. And if I don't? I smiled, and apparently it wasn't a pleasant expression, because Sarah actually took a step back. Then I stopped being nice about this. I've got enough evidence to make both of your lives very complicated. David's got a reputation to maintain in his industry, and you've got a career that depends on people trusting you with their brand image. How do you think that works out when everyone knows you're the kind of person who lies to her husband's face for months? Sarah stared at the folder for a long moment, then looked up at me with something that might have been respect. When did you become so cold? About the same time you decided our marriage vows were more like guidelines. She packed her bags that afternoon while I sat in the living room drinking coffee and listening to her move around upstairs. When she came down with her suitcases, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, Pete, I'm sorry it ended this way. No, you're not, I said without looking up from my newspaper. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. After she left, I called Jake to let him know the situation was resolved. Then I called a locksmith to change the locks. Then I ordered pizza and opened a beer, because suddenly I had a lot to celebrate. But apparently, Sarah and David weren't quite ready to accept their new reality. The first sign of trouble came the following week when my boss called me into his office. Tom Bradley had been running Midwest IT Solutions for 15 years, and he had the kind of no-nonsense approach that made him easy to work with. Pete, I got a strange call yesterday, he said, closing his office door behind me. Someone claiming to be a former client said you'd been unprofessional during a service call. Apparently, you made inappropriate comments about their personal life. I felt that familiar, cold sensation in my chest. What kind of comments? The caller said you accused them of having an affair and threatened to expose their personal information. They want to file a complaint. Tom, I've never done anything like that. Can you tell me who called? Tom consulted his notes. Someone named David Chen said you worked on his company's network last month. Bingo. David was trying to get me fired, probably hoping it would pressure me into backing off. Unfortunately for him, I'd never actually worked on Pinnacle Marketing's network, and I had the client records to prove it. Tom, I've never had any professional contact with David Chen or his company, but I can tell you exactly who he is and why he's trying to cause problems for me. I gave Tom the abbreviated version of recent events, focusing on the professional maltreatment angle rather than the personal drama. Tom listened with the kind of patient attention that made him a good boss. So this is retaliation for exposing his affair with your wife? That's my assessment. Tom nodded slowly. Well, his story doesn't check out anyway. We don't have any record of service calls to Pinnacle Marketing, and frankly, Pete, you're one of the most professional technicians I've got. I'm going to file this under personal vendetta and forget it happened. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the support. Just keep me posted if this escalates. I don't like people trying to mess with my employees' livelihoods. David's next move was more creative. I started getting friend requests on social media from fake accounts. Obvious catfish profiles with stolen photos and minimal information. When I didn't accept them, I began receiving anonymous messages on various platforms, all with the same basic theme. I was a controlling husband who'd driven my wife away with jealousy and paranoia. The messages were clearly written by someone who knew details about my situation, but they had the kind of overwrought emotional tone that suggested David was not handling the stress of his new circumstances very well. Apparently, having his affair exposed had consequences he hadn't anticipated. I screenshotted everything and added it to my growing file of evidence. If David wanted to play games, I was happy to keep score. But the real problem started when Sarah began trying to turn our mutual friends against me. Lisa and Michelle had been Sarah's friends first, so losing them wasn't unexpected. But when couples from our social circle started declining invitations and avoiding eye contact at the grocery store, I realized Sarah was running a more sophisticated campaign than I'd given her credit for. The confrontation came at Jake's birthday party 3 weeks later. I'd been looking forward to it, a chance to get out of the house and spend time with people who knew the real story. But when I walked into Murphy's back room, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Our friend group had always been small but tight-knit. Jake and his girlfriend Amy, Tom and Jennifer Walsh, who ran a local accounting firm, Mike and Susan Chen, no relation to David despite the name, and usually Sarah and me, though obviously that dynamic had changed. What I hadn't expected was to find Sarah there, sitting at the far end of the table like she belonged. "Pete!" Jake called out a little too loudly. "Glad you made it." I could see the tension in his shoulders. This wasn't his idea. "Surprised to see Sarah here," I said, taking the empty chair across from her. "It's my birthday," Jake said carefully. "I invited everyone." Sarah looked up from her drink, something pink and expensive looking. "I have just as much right to be here as you do." "Actually, you don't," I said calmly. "These are my friends." "You're the one who decided to blow up your life for your boss?" The table went quiet. Tom Walsh cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just focus on celebrating Jake's birthday," Jennifer suggested. "Good idea," Sarah said, raising her glass. "Let's toast to new beginnings and leaving toxic situations behind." The passive-aggressive dig was so obvious it was almost funny. But what bothered me was the way Mike and Susan were nodding along, like Sarah was the victim in this scenario. "Interesting perspective," I said. "Tell me, Sarah, how exactly was I toxic? Was it when I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for your car? Or when I supported your career change? Or maybe it was when I didn't immediately divorce you the first time you lied to my face?" "You were controlling and paranoid," Sarah shot back. "You monitored my phone, tracked my spending, and accused me of things without any proof." "I had plenty of proof. I just gave you the chance to come clean before I used it." Amy leaned forward. "What kind of proof?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos from Murphy's. "The kind that shows your friend here having romantic dinners with her married boss while telling me she was working late." The pictures made their way around the table. I watched faces change as people realized this wasn't a case of marital miscommunication. It was a straightforward affair with photographic evidence. But Sarah wasn't done. "Those pictures don't show what you think they show. David and I have a professional relationship. We were discussing a client project. Right, I said. Is that what you call it when he has his hand on your thigh? Client relations? Susan Chen spoke up for the first time. Sarah, is this true? Were you having an affair? Sarah's composure cracked slightly. It's complicated. Pete and I had been having problems for months. David was just supportive. Supportive, I repeated. Is that what we're calling adultery now? You don't understand what it was like, Sarah said, her voice rising. Living with someone who questioned everything I did, who made me feel like a prisoner in my own home. That did it. I'd been trying to keep things civil for Jake's sake, but Sarah's revisionist history was too much. A prisoner? I stood up, and something in my voice made everyone else go very still. You mean like when I encouraged you to take that job at Pinnacle? Or when I paid for your night classes? Or when I gave you complete access to our joint accounts and never questioned a single purchase until you started spending our money on hotel bars with your boyfriend? Pete, Jake started. No, let me finish, I continued, looking directly at Sarah. You want to talk about feeling like a prisoner? Try finding out your wife has been lying to you for months. Try discovering that the person you trusted most in the world has been making a fool of you behind your back. Try having your neighbor tell you she's seen your wife's lover's car in your driveway while you're at work. Sarah's face went white. She hadn't known about Mrs. Rodriguez. And the best part, I continued, is that even now, even after being caught red-handed, you're still lying. You're sitting here trying to make me the villain because I had the audacity to notice that my wife was cheating on me. The room was dead silent. Sarah looked around the table, apparently hoping for support, but found only uncomfortable expressions and avoiding eyes. I think maybe I should go, she said quietly. Yeah, I agreed. You probably should. After Sarah left, the party resumed, but the mood was different. People were more careful with their words, like they were walking through a minefield, but I could see in their faces that they understood now. This wasn't a case of mutual marital failure. It was betrayal, plain and simple. Jake pulled me aside later as the evening was winding down. I'm sorry about that, man. She called me yesterday and said you'd been spreading lies about her. She seemed really upset. She's upset because she got caught. There's a difference. Yeah, I can see that now. Those photos? Jesus, Pete, I had no idea it was that blatant. Most people don't advertise their affairs quite so openly. Sarah and David apparently thought they were being subtle. Jake shook his head. What are you going to do now? Honestly, I'm going to move on with my life. Sarah made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. But David Chen apparently had other ideas. The maltreatment escalated over the next few weeks. My work email started receiving spam from questionable sources. Someone signed me up for dozens of mailing lists, political campaigns, and subscription services. My home address appeared on Craigslist ads offering free furniture, leading to a parade of confused strangers showing up at my door. The pranks were juvenile but persistent, and they had David's fingerprints all over them. He was trying to make my life annoying enough that I backed down from my threat to expose him to his wife. Unfortunately for David, I'd spent my entire career dealing with much more sophisticated forms of digital maltreatment. Script kiddies trying to crash client networks, ransomware attacks, phishing schemes. Compared to actual cybercriminals, David was playing with finger paints. I documented everything, traced what I could, and added it all to my ever-growing file. But more importantly, I started planning my response. The opportunity came when Jake mentioned that Pinnacle Marketing was looking for a new IT contractor. Their previous company had dropped them after some kind of billing dispute, and they needed someone to overhaul their network security. You should bid on it, Jake suggested. It's good money and you could use the work. I smiled. You know what? I think I will. My proposal was competitive, professional, and exactly what Pinnacle Marketing needed. I had the credentials, the references, and the expertise to handle their requirements. The fact that it would give me legitimate access to their internal systems was just a happy coincidence. David tried to block my hiring, of course, but he made the mistake of being too obvious about it. When the other partners asked why he was so opposed to a qualified contractor with excellent references, he couldn't give a good answer without revealing his personal connection to me. I just think we should consider other options, he kept saying, which wasn't much of an argument against someone who was clearly the best candidate. I got the contract. The work itself was straightforward, updating their firewall, implementing better password policies, installing new security software, standard corporate IT maintenance that I could do in my sleep. But it also gave me legitimate access to their email server, network logs, and user activity records. All perfectly legal, since I was their contracted IT provider with administrative access to their systems. What I found was even better than I'd hoped. David had been using company resources for personal business. His email contained correspondence with divorce attorneys, real estate agents, and financial advisors, all sent from his work account during business hours. He'd been conducting his entire personal life through Pinnacle's network. More damaging were the emails between David and Sarah. Hundreds of messages going back months, many sent during work hours, discussing everything from their relationship to strategies for dealing with me. Sarah had been forwarding him information about my work schedule, my friends, even my conversations with her. But the real goldmine was David's correspondence with other employees. He'd been having inappropriate conversations with several female staff members, making comments about their appearance and asking personal questions that definitely violated company policy. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report, organized by date and category, with full headers and metadata intact. Then I scheduled a meeting with Pinnacle's senior partners. "Gentlemen," I said, distributing copies of my report, "during my security audit, I discovered some concerning patterns of network usage that I believe require your attention." The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, David's employment at Pinnacle Marketing was terminated, and they were consulting with their legal team about potential liability issues. But I wasn't done yet. Jennifer Chen, David's soon-to-be ex-wife, received a carefully curated selection of emails showing exactly how David had been spending his time and money during their separation. The documentation was particularly useful for her divorce attorney, who apparently had been looking for evidence of hidden assets and inappropriate conduct. Sarah found out about David's firing when she showed up at Pinnacle for what she thought was a lunch date, and discovered security escorting him out of the building with a box of personal items. She called me that evening, furious. "You did this," she said without preamble. "You got David fired." Actually, David got David fired. I just provided his employers with documentation of his activities. You vindictive bastard. He has a family to support. He should have thought of that before he decided to harass me. Actions have consequences, Sarah. You both seem to have trouble with that concept. This isn't over. Yes, it is, I said calmly. David's career in marketing is finished. No one's going to hire someone who was terminated for cause and is involved in a messy divorce with evidence of adultery. You're welcome to keep seeing him, but I hope you've got a good job, because you're going to be supporting both of you. Sarah hung up on me, but I could hear the desperation in her voice. Her comfortable life was evaporating, and she was finally starting to understand the real cost of her choices. The final blow came a month later, when Sarah's own employment situation became complicated. It turned out that her relationship with David had been an open secret at Pinnacle, and several clients had expressed concerns about the company's professional standards. With David gone and Sarah's reputation damaged by association, the partners decided a clean break was best for everyone. Sarah was let go with 2 weeks severance and a neutral reference that subtly undermined her prospects. She tried one last time to reconcile, showing up at my door on a rainy Thursday evening with tears in her eyes and an apology on her lips. "Pete, I made a mistake, a huge mistake. I know that now." I looked at her standing on my doorstep, our former doorstep, and felt nothing but mild curiosity. The woman who had once been the center of my world was now just someone I used to know. "Yes, you did," I agreed. "Several of them, actually. Can we try again? I know I hurt you, but we had something good once. We could have it again?" "No, we couldn't," I said gently, "because I could never trust you again. And without trust, we don't have anything." "I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust." "Sarah, you spent months lying to my face, bringing another man into our home and spending our money on your affair. When I confronted you with evidence, you tried to make me the villain. When that didn't work, you tried to turn our friends against me. And when your boyfriend started harassing me, you encouraged him." I paused, making sure she was really listening. "The woman I married would never have done those things, which means either you were never who I thought you were, or you've become someone else entirely. Either way, that person is gone, and I'm not interested in whoever's left." Sarah started crying then, the kind of desperate sobs that come from finally understanding that some mistakes can't be fixed. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but that's not my problem anymore. You made your choices, Sarah. Now you get to live with them." I closed the door and went back to my quiet house, my peaceful evening, and my life without drama. 6 months later, I heard through Jake that Sarah had moved back in with her parents and was working at a retail job while looking for something in her field. David had taken a position with a small firm in another state, apparently deciding that a fresh start was his best option. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but no sympathy either. They had created their own problems through a series of deliberate choices, and now they were experiencing the natural consequences of those decisions. As for me, I was doing better than I had in years. Work was going well, my friendships had survived the drama, and I'd started dating someone new. A woman named Rachel, who worked as a veterinarian and had never been married to anyone, let alone cheated on them. The house felt different now, lighter, somehow. I'd redecorated, removing the last traces of my life with Sarah and creating something that was entirely my own. It was smaller than our shared dreams had been, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. One evening, while I was grilling dinner on the back patio, Mrs. Rodriguez called over the fence. "Pete, honey, you look happy." "I am happy," I realized, and meant it. "Good for you. You deserve better than all that drama." "Thanks, Mrs. Rodriguez. I appreciate everything you did to help me figure out what was really going on." She waved dismissively. "I just told you what I saw. You're the one who had the courage to do something about it." That night, as I sat in my living room reading a book and enjoying the silence, I reflected on everything that had happened. Sarah and David had tried to make me the villain in their story, painting me as controlling and vindictive for refusing to accept their betrayal quietly. But the truth was simpler than that. I had simply refused to let them rewrite history or escape the consequences of their actions. When Sarah violated our marriage vows, I documented it and ended the relationship. When David tried to interfere with my livelihood, I defended myself using legal and professional means. When they both tried to destroy my reputation, I provided evidence that spoke for itself. None of it had been personal revenge. It had all been logical responses to their behavior. The fact that those responses had been devastating to them wasn't cruelty on my part. It was the natural result of their own poor decisions. Sarah had wanted privacy rules that allowed her to betray our marriage without consequences. David had wanted to harass me without facing professional repercussions. They had both learned that privacy and freedom come with responsibilities, and violating those responsibilities has a price. I finished my book, turned off the lights, and went to bed in my quiet house, surrounded by my honest life, free from the drama and deception that had once consumed so much of my energy. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully through the night, knowing that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let people escape the consequences of their own choices.